where does Platform Hub fit in, and like what core problems are they looking to does it help solve? And I kind of want to paint the picture of the problem that I ran into when I first started implementing Octopus Deploy almost 10 years ago at this particular point in time. And it kind of coincides, believe it or not, Steve, with uh, when we also wanted to automate our database deployments. So there's kind of this new technology that sits out there. So I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind and kind of walk you through what the problem was and then the challenge that we faced after the fact. All right, so when we, this is back when I was working at a bank, and up until we started looking at automating our database deployments were very manual. It's kind of a, believe it or not, the term that our DBA used was it's like the Wild West over there. And it got quite crazy at times because every team is doing it very differently. Some teams they would deliver just a whole bucket of scripts that you had to run, and it had like an order in which you had to run it. Some teams they gave them like kind of a command and control script that kind of handled that all for them. Some teams they used a different technology, so there was no consistency. Uh, Oftentimes, the first time the scripts ran was when we ran them on production, and so we wanted to solve that problem by doing the automating of the database deployments. And so like, okay, how do we get that into our deployment process? So we were looking at different tools, and the tools that the tool that we picked is kind of unimportant, but the important thing to note is that we kind of came up with this workflow where we wanted to build a Delta report to check for auto approval. We wanted to notify the DBAs. We wanted to approve the Delta script, and then we wanted to deploy the database changes. This was the workflow that we had landed on after talking with the DBAs, after talking with all that. Now, one of the things that we said was like, hey, we don't need to notify the DBAs for every single, every single deployment. And so we said, hey, what would be great is if we could just specify, at what stage do we want to start notifying the DBAs? Because I know some teams they were talking like, hey, we'd really like to be able to notify the DBAs at in test, for example, because they're actually embedded with us. And so they want to see the things happening in almost near real time as they're checking into main, merging into main, and doing all that other stuff. Whereas other teams, they don't have the DBA embedded with them yet. So they're more like, hey, it's more of a shared resource. Let's wait until we go to staging before we get the DBA to review. We'll have our database developer review everything prior to that, but they do that as part of the pull request. So, okay, that's great. Happy days. So we created a so we had this kind of workflow that we put together. Now, Steve. Did you ever do project cloning with Octopus? It's like a pseudo templating version.
I haven't done project cloning, but I have been cheeky by using the version controlled projects
Okay.
and then shipping the OCL file to all of my other projects that are the same, which is kind of like a bit of a cheat code.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's not really quite the same thing, because especially back in the day, we didn't have OCL. That's fairly new. This decade. So what we what we ended up doing is we would say, okay, let's put together a project, a templated project that represents the workflow that we came up with. And so, we had the deployed database. And then what we would do is we'd come into project settings and we'd say, let's clone this. And so we would clone it and move on. And then so every team, they'd come in, they'd clone it for their application and happy days. And that worked great on day one. But then something happened I remember this distinctly, where in the approvals, the build Delta report for auto approval, what was happening with the tool was we would build this report, and then that would get approved, and then basically we would throw it away. And we would regenerate the Delta scripts on the fly, and that's what was getting run in the deployed database changes. And so everyone was, the DBAs were not super happy with that. The developers weren't super happy with that. And so we were holding the tool for the database deployments incorrectly. And we found an option and we said, oh, if we set this option, we can save this report and reuse that report for the deployed database changes. The reason why I'm telling you this is because I then had to go into every single person's project and change that. And there was
Yeah.
probably, at the time, there was 40 of them, and that sucked. That was awful. And then we made the decision, oh, we need to upgrade to the latest version of the step template. So then I had to go back through to every person's project and update it. It's like, this is not fun. This is not a thing that we really enjoy doing. And so it's like, okay, we wish we had like this templating system, because what this solves for us is it allows us to make changes. If I needed to change something in my case, it's just a script. If I needed to change something in the script, I could change it, and then that would automatically get pushed out to all of the consuming projects. Happy days. I don't only have to think about it. Not only that, we also have different ways to version. So we can have patches for bug fixes, minor changes, or breaking changes. And in my consuming project, if I come into here, in my process itself, I can select how I want to get changes. So I can say, hey, you know what? I only want to accept patches. I'll automatically accept all patches that get pushed out there because it's non-breaking, it's only a minor change, it's all good. Versus accept all changes, which is more of the what I call the YOLO of templating. It's like, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Just do whatever you got to do. And, and versus, I mean, accept minor changes. I think the only reason I don't have that turned on, I think most people should just have that turned on, is probably for demo purposes, so I can just do a minor change and show people what that experience is like. But really, you as a consumer, you can control how you want to receive those changes as well. Because if it's a breaking change, and this is what we ran into with step templates, is that if there was a breaking change and you applied the latest version, you might have to change your parameters. Um, some parameters might have been removed. Any number of different things. It might have caused your deployment to suddenly start failing because of another thing, and you didn't want to do that, especially if you have a big production push occurring over the next couple of weeks and you're doing lots of deployments through all your environments. You want to wait until things have settled down. It's like, okay, now I'm ready to accept those breaking changes. So you get more control over when you want to do that, but you still have the capability to get the automatic update. So that was problem number one that we wanted to solve. Problem number two that we wanted to solve was so we have this notify DBA step and the DBA approval step. And we, some teams were like, this approval thing is just slowing us down. And so they just removed it. That's not a good thing. Um, and so with the template, we can control, like, no one, I can't come in here and I can't just say, hey, you know what, remove this step. You can see that I'm still, obviously things are still in alpha stage right now, but I can't remove that step. On the other side of that, if there are steps that aren't necessarily in the template, or I need to make sure that people are using that template, there's really no good mechanism that was in place for Octopus until we started adding our policy engine. So the policies that we're going to be writing, the first couple policies, the first one is going to be, when I deploy to production, will it run this template or this step? And so I know it's going to run. And so I have that something that I can attest to and I can show, yes, absolutely. There's no way for someone to get to production, no way that someone can turn off this step or skip this step or do whatever the case may be uh, when they get up to production, because I need this step to run. And so what we were doing is we were running API scripts, I think every hour, to make sure that key steps were part of the deployment process. And if they weren't, then the platform engineers were sending out emails, and they slowly start out with, "Hey, I noticed you turned off this step," and then it slowly evolve into nasty grams. It's like, you need to turn on that step.
That makes sense. And it's
Yeah.
like the cloning option is one of those things where it feels good at the time because you now have a standard, but keeping the standard maintained, making sure because there's loads of ways it can deviate. One is that, as you said, you update your central standard because you've noticed something that could be improved,
Yep.
and now you have to try and bring everything else up to that standard. Second one, which you've also alluded to, like with the policies, is you have a standard in place, and then people are like, I'm bored of the standard, I'm going to switch that piece off, right?
Yeah.
Things like that. Um, and then the interesting third piece is like whenever you've done something like a clone, and then you have that manual task of bringing those clones up to the standard, it's all the surprises along the way. Like you do 30 of the 40, and then the 31st one, they've megally configured that, right? They've gone in and they have
Oh yeah.
customized it. So now your little change that you've repeated 30 times and you were just getting up to toil speed, you're now like, ah, I can't do that. I now have to think of how I would apply the change in this very different process because it's drifted so much.
Yeah.
I found this when I was working on, I was working for a SaaS company, and they had grown by taking on some big customers. And so they'd done a copy and paste of the code base so they could customize it, right, to win those first few customers. Um, and you'd have a bug fix and you'd put it into the first of these customers, and then you'd have to get it into the code bases for the other customers, but they'd all drifted, so you would have to sometimes fix the bug in 5 or 6 different ways.
Yeah.
And we did a big project to kind of bring it all together, right? Let's have one code base, for all of the customers because it's just not scalable otherwise. So this is kind of crucial for bringing in some kind of standard, which is one of the things that platform teams are heavily responsible for, is trying to bring people to a certain standard. But also, it's massively easing the burden of keeping the standard up to date,
Yep.
checking that people are, in compliance with the standard, but it's not clipboard compliance, right? This is like
Yeah.
something that the tool is helping you do. So yeah, I can kind of see all of the benefits for that. My cheat version using OCL files still has these problems, right? Because I'll update the OCL file on a project and tweak it and improve it, but I can then open up another project where I'm going to copy that file into and find that it's been customized. And
Yeah.
like when you're writing the template, you're very careful to make sure that nothing project specific gets in there, but if someone is in that project and they're customizing it, it very often becomes very project specific. So now it's like completely incompatible and unusable by any other project. So yeah, I mean, it should be quite an easy task for me to switch from my copy paste cheat to using Platform Hub, and then I'll just get all those benefits. And the ability to say, just take all of those minor updates, just take
Yeah.
them, like that's such a great way of doing it because now, until you decide to make a breaking change, you'll be in a situation where pretty much everyone is just always up to date.
Yeah.
And if you make a breaking change, then you have a little bit of a task to just kind of make sure people are updating and making that change, but like at a time that suits their workloads.
And it's interesting because um, it when it comes to like accepting minor changes, patches, breaking changes, everything like that. I think one of the things we wanted to kind of set a standard on was, okay, what does qualify as a minor change versus a breaking change? So in my mind, a minor change is something that where you don't have to add or change any parameter types. That's a huge thing. So if you're not doing that, that's okay. Or you're not fundamentally changing the way the script works. So like you're swapping out a tool, for example. Going from, say red gates fly away to DB up for some reason. If you're doing that, that's clearly a breaking change. And then if it's just like, oh, I'm making some tweaks, I'm adding a little bit of new functionality, yeah, okay, that's a minor change. But if I'm just fixing a bug or something like that, that's obviously a patch. And what's nice about that is you can also communicate that out as a team. I think what's interesting about this is it's not, yes, it's platform teams that benefit per se, but to today's platform engineers are going to be, there's probably going to be some other term that's going to get thrown out there because I mean, what 3 4 years ago platform engineers were called DevOps engineers, and then before we had that they were just kind of, I think they were just admins or sysadmins or IT op admins, or the role day-to-day job didn't really change, but the titles change on something like that. So it's really that centralized team that's responsible for establishing these standards and enforcing those standards and pushing those out. um, and yeah, being able to push out those changes and those standards in a nice, easy way, that to me is a huge game changer. But at the same time, I want to share my screen again because I want to really talk this through. I also have the flexibility as an application developer to have different steps in my deployment process. I'm going to take a step back because it's a little bit easier to see up here. So I have two templates included in here, but in my particular case, I want to store all of my sensitive variables in Azure Key Vault because that's what I'd be deploying to. But if I'm deploying to say AWS, maybe I want to use AWS's Key Vault. So I have that flexibility to change it out. I haven't really set any other standards in here, but maybe I have a different step on how I want to verify my deployment. So I still have the flexibility as an application team to inject my own custom steps. So really what you can focus in on is I want to generate these kind of Lego building blocks, these templates that are absolutely critical, but they can be applied almost universally. There's not going to be a whole lot of, hopefully not a lot of drift between these types of templates. And so I can cover 80%, 85% of common use cases that teams run into. Hey, how do we deploy a database? Soon I'm going to have a template for deploying to Kubernetes. How do I deploy to Kubernetes? Here's how you do it. But then there's going to be, well, how do I verify the deployment? Well, that's going to be unique per team. Or how I want to notify folks, or I want to do these other things. And so now I kind of get that flex. I still get that flexibility, but I have the appropriate Lego building blocks to have these multi-step templates in order to allow me to do that. So I think it's really kind of this combination of best of both worlds. Whereas before, it's really been I think with a lot of templating systems that I've seen, and it's always been like an all or nothing type of thing. Like
Yeah.
it's the entire process, and that's it. You can't have any flexibility whatsoever.
And this is a combination, right? Because a Lego block is a very small piece.
Yes.
And that's kind of step templates have done that, right? That's the smallest unit. But then this is taking it up to a composition. So it's a little
Yes.
bit like you've got a classic kind of Lego chassis. You've got the wheels and you've got all of those bits and pieces, but you haven't put the rest of the vehicle together yet. It could be anything. It could be a moon buggy or it could be a race car. You haven't decided. And that's what these kind of process templates are giving you is like that piece that you can build around. So it's
Yeah.
like a whole bunch of Lego bricks put together in a configuration that you're going to reuse. And then presumably, when it comes to projects, it's you know, the next thing again, right? Where you're actually you've got more pieces all ready to go. But the
Yeah.
difference being the way this works and the way that you can inject your other steps, you're not limited really to where you put them, right? You can put them before, you can put them after.
Yeah,
Like,
you can't put them in the middle of the template, but yes, you can put before or after, and you can have the templates run in the order that you want them to run in. Yeah, that's. I was actually asked that by a customer recently. It's like, hey, can we inject a step into the middle of the template? I'm like, that's not really how templates work, but okay, yeah, no, that's not something
yeah,
that we're exploring right now for process templates. For project templates, yeah, that's definitely on the radar for us to start looking into to adding in
yeah.
something like that.
The difficulty with putting something in the middle of a process template is that you would have to have a really strong contract about what's going to happen before and
Yeah.
after. So yeah, it would end up being like a swappable Lambda function. So it would have to accept the right arguments and give the right
Yeah.
arguments back out to know that the process will still have integrity. But like if you've got a process that does a Slack notification, you could add on an email notification for
Yeah.
yourself if that's what you want to do as a team, or if you want to kind of do a webhook so it appears on some dashboard that you've created for yourselves.
Yeah. So I kind of know it's funny because I kind of think of project templates for those applications where the drift between how you deploy it is almost minuscule or doesn't barely exist outside of here's the thing I want to deploy, push it out there. Common use case would be like microservices.
Yeah.
How I deploy, everything's backed by a queue or something like that. Okay, just throw it all. We're going to deploy almost the exact same way, or maybe we might have two or three different project templates. Maybe one for, hey, we're going to have one for, we write to a message bus, and that's really all we do. We just accept a message, we write it to a message bus, happy days, we do the thing. Um, and then there's another ones that are like, hey, we might be a little more complex. We have a database backend. Okay, so you might have a couple of templates to handle that, but really, it's not going to. There's the delta between it's not really going to change outside of a few small configuration things. And that's really in my mind where project templates can help out. That's where you'd kind of start. In my mind, that'd be kind of where you'd start out, especially if you're just starting to use, say, Octopus Deploy as well. Outside of we want to have microservices, maybe we want to standardize. This is how we deploy to AWS Lambdas, for example, or this is how we deploy to IaaS. But then as teams mature, as they learn more, as they familiarize with their tools, they're like, hey, it'd be great if I had a bit more control. Our application's not really a snowflake, but we want to have more control over the process. We've learned the tool, we feel confident about it. We have the DevOps engineer embedded. Okay, let's switch over from just project templates. Can we just use process templates? But you have the policies in place that ensures that I'm still following all the standards, I still get all the compliance, I'm still using the key bits, but I just want to be able to mess around with these other things. So it's kind of, I think it'd be kind of like this evolution that would occur based on your kind of maturity or the team's maturity of using the tool. Because it might be, I mean, you might onboard a team to a 10-year-old instance, and this is their very first experience to Octopus. And so having a project template really helps them get going versus, a team that's been using it for 10 years. They know all the ins and outs. Like, yeah, just give me some templates. I'm good to go. Like, I don't need all these controls in place. So,
Yeah. And I think there's an interesting opportunity here, which I've seen before. There's the kind of standardization, which is like getting hit over the head with something,
yeah, yeah,
which very often comes with like a clipboard wielding compliance person. And I can say that because I worked in compliance once, so I'm kind of making fun of myself. But there's the kind of standardization where you work out the way that works, right? Someone finally works it out, and
yeah,
everyone else goes, we would like to use the way that works. And so it's like a pull. They want to use that process. And the old way of dealing with this is that the team that was previously successfully working out how to do this stuff with their own thing suddenly isn't working on their product anymore because they're
yep,
now going and helping out all the other teams. And you've almost like you've you've broken up a team temporarily to go and help all these other teams. So this gives a mechanism where you could say, you know what, it would not be a huge effort for us to represent what we've worked out as a template. Like, okay,
yeah,
we're deploying a microservice, right? Okay, here is a microservice template, and everyone else who's deploying one of these things can just grab that and use it, and we can all work out when we want to make a change, we can have a mechanism for that where we're like, oh, I've
yeah,
seen an opportunity to improve it. Like with your double delta script, right? So you create a delta script, it gets approved, and then you were creating a different delta to actually apply. Like someone realizes that and they're like, we should reuse that same one that got approved because otherwise another change could slip in that hasn't actually been approved.
yeah.
And yeah, and you fix it. And it's that inner source then, isn't it? Where you have this community of people, the ideas can come from anywhere, but everyone gets that improvement, which is really cool. So it's like everyone is leveling up.
And not only that, um, we almost from the get-go, we're encouraging that when you think about it, because all of our process templates might have been lost. I'm going to share the screen again. All of the process templates that we have, let's go back to Platform Hub. These are all stored in version control. And so you can encourage that from the get-go. You can say, all right, if you have an idea to change, great. Create a new branch, make the change in the branch. We have mechanisms where we can publish pre-releases. So you can publish a pre-release from a different branch, and it would change up there. And you could test it out, make sure it looks good. And once you've tested it and you've verified it, you can go ahead and merge it back in, using a pull request. And the people who do the approving of the pull request, maybe that's that centralized team or the person who originally wrote the template or a group of individuals who have the expertise on the template, and it's one of them. And so you can kind of create this collaboration environment. I think that's super important. Going back to your point of having the clipboard wielding compliance person or that centralized team where it's kind of like they live up in an ivory tower and they're like, don't bother them. They're the only ones that could actually touch this stuff. Now it's like, okay, we're going to be much more of a collaboration. We can improve it. We can leverage all of our collective knowledge to make something work a little bit more better, I guess.
Yeah, and in the platform maturity model that the CNCF developed, that mode of working where you have a platform team who obviously are trying to help make these things happen, but when the contributions can come from anywhere, anyone who uses the platform can make a contribution to improve it. That inner sourcing model is like the highest maturity level for
Yep.
platform
Yep.
engineering. So like if you can get a tool that is going to encourage that way of working and give you the way of getting to that way of working, that's a huge acceleration. And this reminds me of what Gregor Hopi says about floating platforms. Like if you're using Octopus today, you might have written something that tries to do some of this stuff.
Yeah.
You might have a bunch of custom code where you're like either doing some cloning or doing my copy OCL file cheat code. You might have a script that copies it to a whole bunch of locations and does commits or something like that. Um, but you'll be able to kind of transfer all of that complexity down. Like you can shift that down, and then your platform gets lighter and like floats on top of the features that are now available. So this should be a really good opportunity for people to make sure that they are floating instead of having their version plus tool versions. They just push all that complexity down and then focus your effort on something else that's like more context specific.
Actually creating the templates,
Yeah.
actually creating the policies as opposed to writing the code to maintain the templates or, actually do some sort of templating. Yeah. That to me is the more valuable thing. It's the creation of those templates and, making sure that those meet the team's needs, not that whole syncing mechanism or writing that custom API script to rip through all. At the time, we only had one space. The whole concept, we didn't have the concept of spaces, but rip through all the projects and make sure that every single deployment process had this particular step. That takes a non-zero amount of time, but you also need a process that runs that script, and that takes a non-zero amount of time to maintain and ensure, hey, did it run? If it didn't run, I need another thing to make sure that it didn't run, to check,
Yeah.
when was the last time that ran? So it's like you kind of need this whole workflow on top of a workflow on top of workflow. Uh, yeah, so it's just kind of this crazy thing that ends up happening, that you don't realize all of these little things. And it almost feels a little bit, you use the term floating platform. Would you also classify that a bit as unplanned work? Because, you kind of, when you have to kind of build these custom things on top of tools, you have this unplanned work of having to maintain all of these things. You install a new version of the tool, and now suddenly things start breaking because the API has changed or some sort of requirements have changed. So it ends up kind of being this unplanned work, and that ends up being the silent killer of your productivity as well.
Yeah, I think it's probably hard to measure, but platform teams should try and be aware of how many of the features they are developing in the platform are things that are really just general purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
You like a mechanism to maintain a template of a pipeline is not the thing the team needs to build. They're only building a mechanism for that because they need the next thing, which is the specific process that they want to help people adopt, like the golden path.
Yep.
So you're trying to build a golden path, but you're having to build things for it to go on, and those things that need to be maintained and updated and scanned for security vulnerabilities and evolve with changing needs. So I think all tool vendors should be looking to give them that groundwork. It's like we are ready to go. Just take your nice golden blocks and pave the way. That's the piece you should be doing. We've done the landscaping, we've done the foundations, we've got all of those pieces in place. And it should give them more time to give their end users, like the developers and
Yeah.
their stakeholders, like their security teams, give them what they need instead of building, it's that classic thing. I mean, I've been there before where you build your own message bus.
Oh,
Um,
100%. Yeah.
and it's like, what am I doing? Why am I building a message bus here?
Yeah.
But yeah, and you just spend the rest of your life maintaining a message bus when you know, that's not the thing that's unique to your organization or that's unique to your context. That's giving you that value. It's just something you need.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think having the flexibility, like we were talking about, for the application teams, because when you want to generate, I think the challenge that I've seen, like we talked about just a little bit ago, is when you have a tool that just says this is the template and you can't deviate from the template whatsoever. All you can do is here are a couple parameters and we'll try to make it. There's two traps that people end up falling down. The first trap is, well, I really don't have to think about how this thing works because it was just given to me, and you told me, like, you give me a container and I'll figure out how to deploy it, or you give me the version control and I'll figure out how to make a container and I'll figure out how to deploy it. Like, so I don't have to think about this at all. And so then you end up in a situation where the platform teams become these kind of bottlenecks where they just have to process these tasks over and over and over again of failed deployments or debug this or this isn't working or why is this working the way it is? It's not running as fast as I want it to run. All these little things that
Yeah.
just kind of slowly go ha ha ha. And so as a response to that, I think the centralized teams end up creating these templates that are more and more and more and more complex. As I think a term that you used in a previous conversation is robust. Maybe they're too robust.
Yeah. Yeah, they're having to handle too many different scenarios.
Yeah,
And then they end up just being spaghetti. So yeah, I think it's interesting because I think history asserts itself on us. And
yep,
I think a lot of platform teams who end up in that situation where it's like, now the developers can just code and throw it over the fence and it's someone else's problem. It's like, well, isn't that what we tried to solve with DevOps? Like bringing
yeah,
developers and operations into collaboration and making them share goals. So if we create a platform team where it's like your goal is to solve that complex problem over there, developers, you just focus on features, like we're deliberately creating the old problem if we're not careful, especially if we start making it so that that platform team is like they just get a ticket from developers. I have a new thing, set it up for me, right? It's like now
yep.
it is just IT ops again. So that's not
That's
helpful.
it's funny. I always think it's a cyclical thing because it's also a reflection of the new technologies that are coming out, and are here in the digital transformations that we're seeing. We still are, companies are still talking about cloud migrations. Some companies are talking about reverse cloud migrations where they're going back to self-hosted after being on the cloud, and they got the bills and they go, whoa, it'd be cheaper for me just to run it myself. Teams are now adopting Kubernetes is a big thing. Obviously, I mean that's been a very popular thing, and we're seeing the adoption continue to rise on that. Um, AI is a huge thing, but what's one of the more interesting stats we saw recently was that AI workloads, 54% of them are running on Kubernetes, and so you've
Yeah.
kind of now you have two things that you're changing. Now you're implementing AI, you're running these AI workloads for the very first time, and you're deploying your Kubernetes. And so there's just so much information that you're asking, I think, developers to front load because I mean Kubernetes is not a simple thing to just pick up and just start doing in 2 minutes. It's not right. There's no right click deploy like what Microsoft used to do with with old .NET applications. So there's all these other things, and so what ends up happening is like, whoa, we're expecting these developers, all of my developers, let's say I have 1,000 developers, spend the time to learn how this new tool like Kubernetes works in order to just do a basic thing. Okay, let's have platform teams handle some of that stuff. Let's accelerate that because we can, if it's only like 5 or 6 people learning this, setting the standards, becoming the experts, they can kind of then take that knowledge and say, okay, we can accelerate all these other teams. But I think the danger is when you don't basically have that centralized team teach the developers. Hey, we've learned, we've researched, we've done all this stuff. Here are the standards. Here's why it is. Here's how the tool works. We're going to kind of go through like almost like a university, a little bit of a teaching course. It's when they hoard that knowledge that comes back to this. We're going back to the old ways where ops and devs were completely separate when you have that hoarding of that knowledge.
Yeah, 100%. And this is I suppose the classic concept is, and you referred to this earlier, this ivory tower concept, where if you have someone who is completely separate and doesn't interact with this group of developers, but they're making decisions that they're going to try and enforce on those developers, that's always going to lead to trouble. Like we had it when there was an era where enterprise architects kind of went into a room and did their
Mm-hmm.
special thing. I was working on a product for our health service in the UK, and the architects had come up with this really customized certificate validation routine for a provider to authenticate with our health service to say like we trust each other. And it was really hard. I was writing custom certificate validation code and all kinds of things that previously I'd never done because
Yeah.
normally you just say, I'm using this protocol and it loads whatever your framework will have a way of doing that automatically, and off you go. And I happened to speak to the team on the NHS side when we were testing to make sure we could talk to each other. And I said, in the programming languages I'm using, this has been very hard to do. Like I've never done something this complex in terms of certificate validation. I said, I'm assuming that, you're using this different language, I know. So I'm assuming it's just kind of standard in that language. And they were like, nope, absolute nightmare. This is not how our language or framework uses it at all. And that's just this thing, right? Because the architects were so far away from anyone developing it, they probably hadn't seen how certificate validation was done in modern Java or modern .NET or whatever
Mm-hmm.
applications and programs we were using. They didn't even know what was available to us. So they just invented it themselves in a room with no communication. And it was just we probably lost 4 months between the two sides trying to just swap a certificate and trust each other. I've never known anything like it. But that's what the danger of the platform engineering is. You can't go into a room and do all of this cool stuff and no one knows what you've done.
Yeah.
That's the route to failure.
They're in the book, the Unicorn Project. There's a scene in there. I just can't I come back to. It's when they want to go to. It's like the equivalent of like it's not a change approval board, but it's like the architect approval board. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but the main characters they're going to present their project and what they're going to try to do. But before that, there was another group that was saying they were just trying to get approval for I think it was something like a Apache Tomcat to be used, or some sort of known open source project that's like lived for at that point 15, 16, 17 years. And the architects were like, well, like you stroke their long beards and they're like, well, I don't think so. Like there's some risk with using some open source projects, and we're not quite sure if it can pass our security validation. So why don't you try and why don't you do some of that and come back in 3 months? And like one of the characters is like pulling out his hair. It's like, you kidding me? It's like
Yeah.
this is a known thing. Like the industry
Yeah.
has accepted
And you kind
this.
of feel those that style of approval is so classic because they don't intend to approve it in 3 months if you manage to
No.
tick all of the boxes. They've knocked it down 3 months. If you came back and said, "Oh yeah, we did the security scans, we did this," there'll be some other reason why they can knock it out another
Yeah.
3 months. It's unending.
I've come to for a lot of things like that. I also think almost when you talk about change approval boards or any sort of like these approval boards, it feels like their mission is not approval. Their mission is to deny. And so
Yeah.
that's they'll always come up with a reason, like because we can't update that we can't impact the status quo. Yeah, it drives anyone who's had to deal with that. I can only imagine. I mean, this is why I don't have a lot of hair left. You know, having,
Yeah, I
having to
think
deal with
there's a
all
lot of
that.
fear, isn't there? Fear drives these processes. So
Hmm.
every time one little thing goes wrong, the kind of fear index just rises a little bit more,
Yep.
and then the chances of people saying yes to anything just kind of dry up. So yeah, everyone's had that. It's the opposite of, I always talk about a trust loop. The way that you get to the process that Dora described with lightweight change approvals and
Yep.
frequent deployments, all of the good stuff, you have to make sure that you can eliminate all that fear and build the trust back up. Because the only reason all this stuff exists is because in 1996, they did a deployment in December and it caused a major problem. And so now the rule is you don't deploy in December because of
Yep.
this thing that happened 30 years ago. And each time it happens, they add another rule. Oh, we also don't deploy on a Friday anymore because once we deployed on a Friday, it went wrong. Oh, and we don't use this database anymore because we had a problem with that database once, and it's like all you do is like eventually eliminate every option if you work in that way. So you have to get the confidence back up, remove the fear, and start removing some of the rules. Test them. It's Chesterton's fence. Like, what
Yeah.
is the reason this thing was put there? Is it still valid? If not, we should try removing it and just watch what happens.
And I think that's the concern I have with the platform engineering, this whole movement is like if it becomes just another one of those cases of like, oh, we just say no. We come up with the processes and we'll say no to everything that deviates from that process, and yeah, so it's a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
So the more that you can collaborate, the more that you can surface this information, I think the better overall it can be. So yeah, that's a really long-winded way of saying why am I so excited for Platform Hub?
I think it's really cool. I think the key
Yeah,
takeaways are um, getting getting your tools to do this work for you is
yeah,
crucial,
yeah,
especially if they can do it in a really neat way, like these composable blocks. That's a really cool way of doing it, and the way it does the updates is solves the kind of classic problem of who wins if there's a conflict, because now that just can't happen anymore.
yeah,
The updates should be successful every time, which is a really cool thing. And probably the key takeout for platform teams is to be a big enabler, like a force multiplier, not a bottleneck, basically. So
yeah.
yeah.